In my 35 years on the bench in Providence, Rhode Island, I've seen just about everything walk through those courtroom doors. I've listened to thousands of stories, wiped away more tears than I can count, and learned that behind every citation, every violation, every mistake, there's a human being with a story worth hearing. But I've got to tell you, my friends, nothing quite prepared me for the morning Chief Michael Barone walked into my courtroom with an attitude that would change everything. If this story touches your heart, I want you to hit that subscribe button, because what happened next taught me something profound about respect, humility, and what it really means to serve justice with compassion. It was a Tuesday morning, crisp autumn air filtering through the old windows of Providence Municipal Court. I had my coffee, I had my reading glasses, and I had a full docket ahead of me. Standard traffic violations, parking tickets, the usual matters that bring working families into my courtroom hoping for understanding. I've always believed that these small cases matter just as much as any grand trial, because to the single mother worried about feeding her kids, that parking ticket isn't small at all. It's everything. Chief Barone was scheduled for 9:30. He'd received a citation for parking in a fire zone outside the administrative building downtown. Now let me tell you something about my philosophy. I don't care if you're a police chief or a parking attendant. In my courtroom, everyone gets the same respect and everyone follows the same rules. That's how my father raised me, God rest his soul. He came to this country from Italy with nothing but hope and a commitment to integrity. He taught me that character isn't what you do when people are watching. It's what you do when you think nobody's looking. Inspector Quinn had briefed me that morning. "Judge, the chief's coming in today," he said, and there was something in his voice, a warning maybe. Quinn's been with me for years, and I trust his instincts like I trust my own heartbeat. He wasn't particularly cooperative when he got the citation. I nodded, made a note on my papers, and prepared myself to treat this case like any other, because that's what justice demands. When Chief Barone walked in, I could feel the energy in the courtroom shift. He was a big man, probably 6'2", barrel-chested, with the kind of swagger that comes from years of authority. He wore his uniform, badges gleaming under the fluorescent lights, and he had this expression on his face, this smirk, that immediately told me this wasn't going to be a straightforward morning. Behind him, I noticed a young officer, couldn't have been more than 25, watching nervously. The gallery had a few citizens waiting for their own cases, and I saw them sit up straighter, sensing something unusual about to unfold. "Chief Barone," I said warmly because I always start with warmth, "good morning. Please approach the bench." He walked forward with deliberate slowness, his footsteps echoing in that distinctive way that said he wanted everyone to know he was there. When he stood before me, he didn't meet my eyes immediately. Instead, he glanced around the courtroom like he was assessing it, judging it, finding it somehow beneath him. "Chief, you're here regarding a citation for parking in a fire zone on September 14th outside the administrative building on Fountain Street. Is that correct?" I kept my voice even, professional, the same tone I've used 10,000 times before. He shifted his weight, crossed his arms, and then he did something that, in all my years, still has the power to surprise me. He laughed, not a chuckle, not a polite sound, but a laugh that carried contempt. "Judge Caprio," he said, and the way he said my name had an edge to it. "With all due respect, I was responding to an urgent administrative matter. I was parked there for maybe 7 minutes. This citation is ridiculous, and frankly, I'm surprised the court is wasting time on something this trivial when there are real criminals out there." The words hung in the air like smoke. I felt the temperature in the room change. Inspector Quinn's jaw tightened. The young officer behind the chief looked at the floor. The citizens in the gallery exchanged glances. "Before I tell you what I said next, let me ask you something. If you believe respect matters, if you think nobody is above the law, hit that like button right now. Because what happened in the next few moments wasn't just about a parking ticket. It was about the very foundation of what makes our justice system work." I took off my glasses, folded them slowly, and looked directly at Chief Barone. "Chief," I said quietly, "let me ask you something. When one of your officers writes a citation, do you expect the citizen to respect that citation? Do you expect them to appear in court, to follow the process, to acknowledge that the rules apply to them?" He uncrossed his arms, sensing perhaps that the conversation was shifting. "Of course," he said a little less confidently. "That's how the system works." "That's right," I continued. "That's how the system works. And the system, Chief Barone, doesn't have special parking spots for people who think their time is more valuable than everyone else's. A fire zone is called a fire zone because if there's a fire, emergency vehicles need access. You know this better than anyone in this courtroom. You've been in law enforcement for, 27 years? He nodded curtly. 29 years, Your Honor. 29 years, I repeated. Then you know that the moment we start making exceptions based on rank or position, the moment we decide some rules apply to regular citizens but not to chiefs or judges or mayors, we lose the very thing that makes justice meaningful. We lose trust. I could see something flicker across his face, maybe surprise that I wasn't just rubber stamping a dismissal, maybe irritation that I was challenging him publicly, but then he said something that made my heart sink. Judge, I think you're being unnecessarily rigid about this. I've spoken to the mayor about these kinds of procedural nuisances, and we're both in agreement that certain personnel in emergency management capacities need flexibility. The arrogance in that statement, the casual invocation of political connections, the assumption that somehow he could bypass the process by dropping the mayor's name, it crystallized everything that was wrong with this situation. I've been doing this for 35 years, and I've learned that sometimes the most important teaching moments come not from the big dramatic cases, but from these seemingly small interactions where character reveals itself. I leaned forward. Chief Barone, you just mentioned speaking to the mayor about me, about my court, about these proceedings. Is that what you're telling me? That you've been discussing ways to circumvent the normal judicial process? The courtroom went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop on that old wooden floor. He realized suddenly that he'd stepped into something deeper than a parking ticket. I didn't mean it like that, Your Honor. I just meant that in principle we've discussed administrative efficiency. His voice had changed now, less confident, more careful. But the damage was done. He'd shown his cards. He'd revealed that he thought the rules that govern everyone else were somehow negotiable for him. What am I going to do with you? I thought to myself. Here's a man who's spent 3 decades in public service, who's probably done good work, who has officers looking up to him, and he's standing in my courtroom mocking the very principles he's sworn to uphold. I thought about my father, working in the factories, never asking for special treatment, never believing his hard day's work entitled him to cut in line or park where he pleased. I thought about the single mothers who come before me, terrified of a $50 fine that might mean choosing between that ticket and groceries, and I thought about what message it would send if I let this slide. Chief Barone, I said, and my voice carried the weight of every lesson I've learned in this courtroom. I'm going to tell you something, and I want you to listen carefully. When you put on that uniform every morning, when you pin those badges to your chest, you're not just representing yourself. You're representing an ideal. You're representing the promise that in America, under our system of law, everyone is accountable. Everyone. The moment you walked into this courtroom with that attitude, the moment you laughed at this process, you damaged that ideal, not just for yourself, but for every officer who serves under your command. The young officer in the back, I saw him look up now, really look at his chief, and I saw something in his eyes. Maybe hope that accountability still existed, maybe surprise that someone was willing to say out loud what needed to be said. Share this video if you believe that no one is above the law, because what I was about to do would send a message far beyond that courtroom. Chief Barone's face had turned red. Your Honor, I apologize if I seemed disrespectful. That wasn't my intention. But the apology felt hollow, forced, more about damage control than genuine reflection. I've heard thousands of apologies in my time. I can tell the difference between remorse and regret at getting caught. This was the latter. Chief, let me tell you what concerns me most, I continued. It's not the parking violation itself. Honestly, in the grand scheme of things, parking in a fire zone for 7 minutes, if you'd come in here, acknowledged it, explained the circumstances respectfully, we probably could have resolved this very differently. What concerns me is the contempt you showed for this process. What concerns me is that you invoked political connections as if that should influence my decision. What concerns me most of all is that you seem to believe that your position grants you immunity from the accountability you enforce on others every single day. I could see Inspector Quinn nodding slightly. I could see the prosecutor, Maria Santos, watching intently, probably wondering where I was going with this. And I could see in the gallery those citizens who'd been waiting nervously for their own cases, sitting a little straighter now, realizing they were witnessing something important, something about justice being more than just words on paper. The fine for parking in a fire zone is $150, I said. Chief Barone started to reach for his wallet, probably thinking this was over, that he'd pay and leave and put this embarrassment behind him. But I wasn't finished. However, Chief, I'm not going to simply accept your payment and send you on your way. What you did today, mocking this court, suggesting that you're above these proceedings, that requires more than a fine. It requires reflection. His hand froze. Your Honor? Now there was genuine concern in his voice. I'm ordering you to appear before this court again in 30 days. During that time, I want you to do something. I want you to spend one full day, 8 hours, sitting in the gallery of this courtroom watching regular citizens come through here. Watch the grandmother worried about a parking ticket she got while visiting her sick husband in the hospital. Watch the young father who got a speeding ticket rushing his daughter to the emergency room. Watch how people who have far less power than you, far fewer resources, far more struggles, treat this court with respect because they understand that society only works when we all agree to follow the rules. The courtroom was utterly still. This was unprecedented, and everyone knew it. Chief Barone's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. Furthermore, I continued, I want you to write a letter, not to me, but to every officer in your department, explaining what happened here today and what you learned from it. Because, Chief, those officers need to know that leadership isn't about privilege. It's about example. It's about being the first to uphold standards, not the first to excuse yourself from them. Let me tell you something, my friends. In that moment, I wasn't angry. I was disappointed, which is somehow worse. I was disappointed because I know how much responsibility comes with leadership, and I saw someone who'd forgotten that weight. But I also saw an opportunity for teaching, for growth, for demonstrating that accountability isn't punishment. It's the pathway to becoming better. Chief Barone, when you return to this courtroom in 30 days, we'll discuss what you observed, what you learned, and how you plan to carry that forward in your leadership. If you've genuinely engaged with this process, if you've truly reflected on the privilege and responsibility of your position, then we'll resolve the citation with the standard fine. But if you come back here with the same attitude, if you treat this as just another box to check, then we'll have a very different conversation about contempt of court. Do you understand? He stood there for a long moment, and I could see the battle happening behind his eyes. Pride warring with prudence, ego fighting with the growing realization that he'd badly miscalculated. Finally, he nodded. I understand, Your Honor. His voice was barely above a whisper. And, Your Honor, I truly apologize. You're right. I was out of line. Now, this apology sounded different. This one had the tremor of genuine recognition. Chief, I believe in second chances. God knows I've needed plenty in my own life. But second chances only work when we're honest about our first mistakes. Use this time wisely. He nodded again, and I saw his shoulders sag slightly, the swagger completely gone. Thank you, Your Honor. I will. As he turned to leave, I noticed the young officer's expression had completely changed. There was something like relief there, maybe even inspiration. He'd seen that the system could work, that accountability existed even at the highest levels. That was worth more than any fine I could have imposed. Comment below if you've ever had to stand up to someone in authority, because that moment showed me why we can never stop fighting for justice that applies equally to everyone. After Chief Barone left the courtroom, there was this collective exhale from everyone present. Inspector Quinn approached the bench. Judge, he said quietly, that took courage. I shook my head. No, Quinn, that was just the job. The day I start treating people differently based on their uniform or their connections is the day I need to hang up this robe and go home. The rest of that morning's docket proceeded, but something had shifted in the courtroom. When Mrs. Rodriguez came before me for a parking ticket she'd received while her meter expired during her chemotherapy appointment, she seemed less afraid. When young Michael Torres appeared for a speeding violation driving his brother to the hospital, he spoke with more confidence, trusting that he'd be heard. They'd witnessed that this courtroom operated on principles, not politics. They'd seen that I meant it when I said everyone deserves respect and everyone faces accountability. The word spread quickly. By that afternoon, the local news had picked up the story. Municipal court judge orders police chief to court-ordered observation, the headlines read. My phone rang constantly. Some people praised the decision, celebrating accountability. Others, particularly some in law enforcement circles, criticized me for publicly reprimanding a chief, suggesting I'd undermined his authority with his officers. But I've never made decisions based on public opinion. I make them based on what's right. That evening, I sat in my chambers long after everyone else had gone home, thinking about the day. I thought about Chief Barone and wondered whether he'd genuinely learn from this or simply resent the embarrassment. I thought about that young officer and hoped he'd carry forward what he witnessed. And I thought about my father, and I wished I could tell him about this case because I know exactly what he would have said. He would have said, Francesco, you did what you had to do. When you have the privilege of authority, you have the responsibility to use it justly. The 30 days passed slowly. I wondered if Chief Barone would actually complete the court-ordered observation or if I'd face a confrontation about judicial overreach. I prepared myself for either possibility, but when the day came, when I walked into the courtroom that Tuesday morning exactly 1 month later, Chief Barone was already there. He was sitting in the gallery, not in uniform this time, but in plain clothes, and he was holding a notebook. Throughout that day I watched him from the bench. I saw him take notes. I saw his expression change as he listened to story after story. He heard Maria Gonzalez explain that she'd parked illegally because her elderly mother had fallen and she'd panicked. He heard James Sullivan, a veteran, describe how his PTSD medication made him lose track of time at the meter. He heard Sarah Kim, a nursing student working 2 jobs, plead for a payment plan because the fine would devastate her already impossible budget. And I watched Chief Barone's face soften with each story, watched recognition dawn that these weren't just violations on paper. They were human beings navigating impossible circumstances. At the end of that long day, after the last case was heard, I asked Chief Barone to approach the bench. He walked forward, but the walk was completely different now. There was no swagger, no arrogance, just a man who'd spent 8 hours learning something important. "Chief Barone," I said, "tell me what you observed today." He took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I observed people treating this court with dignity even when they were scared. I observed you treating every single person, regardless of their situation, with genuine compassion and fairness. I observed that justice isn't about power, it's about understanding. And I'm ashamed that I didn't see that when I first stood here." His voice cracked slightly on those last words. "Did you bring the letter I requested?" I asked. He handed me an envelope. I opened it and read. It was 3 pages, typed, addressed to his entire department. In it, he detailed exactly what had happened. He didn't sugarcoat or make excuses. He described his arrogance, his invocation of political connections, and his complete failure of leadership. Then he described what he'd learned. That respect isn't automatic, it's earned. That leadership means being the first to uphold standards, not the last. That every interaction with the public is an opportunity to build trust or destroy it. "Chief, this is a good letter," I said when I finished reading. "This shows genuine reflection. Have you sent this to your officers yet?" He nodded. "I sent it last week, Your Honor. I wanted them to know before I came back here. I wanted to be accountable to them first." That answer told me everything I needed to know. He'd gotten it. He'd truly understood. "The citation for parking in a fire zone carries a fine of $150, I said. "I'm going to reduce that to $75 given the time you've invested in this process and the genuine growth you've demonstrated. But more importantly, Chief, I want you to carry forward what you learned. I want you to remember how it felt to be held accountable publicly, and I want you to remember that every person your officers interact with deserves that same commitment to fairness." Chief Barone nodded, and when he met my eyes this time, there were tears there. "Thank you, Your Honor, for not giving up on me, for teaching me something I should have already known." He paid the reduced fine, shook my hand with genuine warmth, and left the courtroom a different man than the one who'd walked in 30 days earlier. That young officer, I learned later, wrote me a letter. He said that watching his chief be held accountable, and then watching him grow from that accountability, changed his entire view of law enforcement. He said he wanted to be the kind of officer who served with both strength and humility, who understood that the badge was a responsibility, not a shield. That letter sits in my desk drawer still. I read it sometimes when I need to remember why this work matters. The story went viral, of course. Millions of people watched the video from that first hearing. The comments were incredible. People from all over the world sharing their own stories of times they'd felt powerless against authority, times they'd wished someone would stand up for accountability. And they shared stories of times they'd been shown mercy when they made mistakes, times when second chances changed their lives. That's what this is all about, my friends. Justice isn't about punishment. It's about accountability and growth. It's about holding everyone, including ourselves, to standards that make us better. If you've made it this far in this story, I want you to do something for me. Leave a comment telling me what you would have done in that situation. Would you have handled it differently? Do you think I was too harsh or not harsh enough? Because these conversations matter. They help us all think more deeply about what justice really means. And subscribe to this channel, because every day in Providence, stories like this unfold. Stories about real people navigating real struggles, and a judge who tries, imperfectly but earnestly, to remember that behind every case file is a beating heart. Chief Barone and I crossed paths several times after that. He'd wave when he saw me at city events. He'd make a point of saying hello, asking about my health, because he knew I'd had my own struggles, my own battles that humbled me and taught me about grace. And I'd ask about his department, about his officers, and he'd tell me with genuine pride about the training programs he'd implemented, focused on empathy and community trust. He told me once, over coffee at a charity event, that being reprimanded in my courtroom was the best thing that ever happened to his career. It reminded me why I took this oath, he said. I'd forgotten that somewhere along the way. That's the thing about accountability, my friends. When it's done with genuine care for growth, when it comes from a place of wanting people to be their best selves rather than just wanting to punish, it transforms. It doesn't diminish people, it elevates them. It reminds us all that we're capable of more than our worst moments. That's what my father taught me. That's what I try to practice every single day in this courtroom. Now, I told you at the beginning that nothing quite prepared me for the morning Chief Barone walked into my courtroom. But the truth is, everything in my life prepared me for that moment. Every lesson from my immigrant father about dignity and integrity, every story I'd heard from struggling families about the weight of small injustices, every time I'd been humbled by my own mistakes and shown grace by others, all of it converged in that moment to help me see clearly what needed to happen. God bless you all for listening to this story. I hope it reminds you that accountability and compassion aren't opposites, they're partners. I hope it encourages you to stand up for what's right even when it's uncomfortable. And I hope it reminds you that we're all capable of growth no matter how far we've strayed from our best selves. Take care of yourself. Treat people the way you'd want to be treated. And remember that justice, real justice, isn't about power. It's about principles applied equally with wisdom and with heart. But let me tell you something. Nothing prepared me for what walked into my courtroom the very next week. And what happened then would test everything I thought I knew about mercy and judgment. But that's a story for another day. Until then, my friends, be good to each other.